I'm going to go through and point out the inaccuracies.
How a 32-bit float recorder works and some of the benefits it provides. So here's how a traditional digital audio recorder works, 24-bit or 16-bit. First,
let me stop you right there. This is how they all work. 16-bit, 24-bit, 32-bit float, 8-bit, 128-bit, a gazillion bit. They all work the same way.
A microphone captures sound and converts that into an analog electrical signal. That audio signal goes into an analog preamplifier, and that's where you set the gain.
Yes, but no. And this is where your lack of experience building electronics really gets you into trouble. And again, I wish you'd get an Arduino kit, an electronics kit, and just learn the absolute basics. And then you would understand this stuff. And an engineer that builds an amplifier or preamplifier does not think about the gain knob. They think about, okay, what is going to be our source voltage? And then what do we want to amplify it to? So the gain knob is secondary. The amplifier is built first. But the expected voltage is coming from the mic, right? And then the expected output or the desired output. The gain knob is put in if they want to give you the ability to change the amount of source current going into the amplifier to increase or decrease the amplification. But the gain knob is secondary. It's not part of it. And this gets you into a lot of trouble because in 32-bit float recorders, there is no gain knob. And it's not as if they all of a sudden discovered that, right? That when they made 32-bit float recorders, they said, oh, you know what? We have 32-bit float. We don't need the gain knob. We're actually going to find a way to get rid of the gain knob. That isn't how it works. The first preamp built for a microphone, I bet, did not have a gain knob. Again, the gain knob is optional. Now, why did they put in the gain knob? Well, they put in the gain knob because if you could control the current going into the amplifier, you could zone into the parts of the microphone voltage that you wanted to make better, to amplify better. That's why it's there, to help you improve your audio capture. It's not there because it has to be there. In fact, the first ones that were built when it wasn't there, what was the problem? Inferior audio, because the person couldn't adjust the gain to focus their window into what they're interested in. It's like, if you try and get everything, you get nothing. And any preamplifier that just tries to amplify everything means that a lot of it is going to be of inferior fidelity. This has been known from day one. And then very quickly, the gain knob, because the electronics engineers building that preamp way back in the day of radio, 100 years ago, right? Because they knew when they tested, they're like, oh, well, if I put a gain knob where I can change the current going into my amplifier, I can improve the signal. So that's why they put it there, to improve the signal. So for you to now say that with 32-bit float, with these recorders that you don't need the gain knob, that you're somehow able to do something that engineer 100 years ago could not do. That is, they could not build a preamp that faithfully amplified a microphone signal throughout its entire range. Okay, but that's a big claim. And you need to do, analysis of the data, of the noise and the other components, as I did a couple days ago, to prove that. Now, I did a quick analysis and I proved what I expected to find, that when you take any preamp that does not have a gain knob that amplifies the whole range of the microphone signal is going to be suboptimal. It's going to have more noise. Again, I'm not learning anything that engineer didn't know 100 years ago. This is just basic electronics. It just infuriates me. That you don't go to, find an electronics engineer and say, hey, the gain knob, what happens if you take away the gain knob? Can you take away the gain knob and still get the same quality you would get with the gain knob? And any audio engineer will tell you, no, no. We haven't invented some new technology that gets around this limitation of all amplifiers. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so I brought up a couple of, I found on the internet a couple of dynamic microphone preamps. And I just want to show you that in every schematic, it will say, this is the input, this is the source voltage that you're going to use for the amplification. The voltage coming from the microphone here is super, super small. So it's like 0.001, whatever, 3, 4 volts, right? And this is going to amplify it to within 0 or 5 volts, or I should say negative 5 volts to positive 5 volts. And again, there's so much complication here. I understand how, yes, it's complicated. So because you're doing a signal, right, it's actually going to be plus 5 volts and negative 5 volts. So we can look at this both as the maximum amount of power that you have to amplify the signal, but we're also really going to think about how that power fluctuates, right, as the microphone diaphragm goes in and out, right? So as it goes out, it'd be plus 5. As it goes all the way in, it would be negative 5. But still, the main point I want to make is that whatever comes in, let's just say it's this 5 volt, it's always going to be fixed. Any voltage that comes, any amplification of the microphone's voltage that tries to basically amplify above this 5 volt line or below it here is going to be clipped. And so from a electronics engineer point of view, they don't think about this. I think they think about this as zero because it's such a hard physical fact. There's nothing you can do about it in a sense. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if you're an electronics engineer, right, building a preamp, you're not, and so he says, oh, but it clips up here. What are you going to do? Well, what can you do, right? I mean, you're asking for a voltage that you don't have, right? So if you don't have the voltage, you don't have the voltage. So don't ask for the voltage. And that's basically how all limiters, automatic gain control, work on the analog end, is that basically, so in a perfect world, you'd have the input from the microphone. Now the microphone is going to share ground that goes into the base of the transistor. And then the transistor, the 5 volts from up here, from your battery, let's just say, is going to go into your transistor, right? And the base from the microphone voltage is going to amplify it. And then it's going to go to this output, which again shares a ground here. And that's it. That's all you would need. All these other things are there to deal with the realities of dealing with electricity and the materials that we have to deal with them. Because forget these fancy numbers. They're just pieces of gallium, silicon, whatever they put in these things. They're just materials. They're just pieces of substance that they put the electricity from. And these substances affect the nature of the electricity. They hold it back as a resistor, or they store it up as a capacitor. But these are all materials. These aren't abstract things. These are actual physical materials. So if we had a perfect physical transistor right here, that's a sign for a transistor, right? If we had that perfect transistor, we wouldn't need any of that. We'd just take 5 volts, microphone input. It would modulate the 5 volt perfectly. So if we have if we have a little small, microphone signal, right, that's here, that it would amplify it. And let's just say this is all like all between 0.01 to 0. Let's say 2 volts, right? That this is amplify it all to, to this, which would be from, let's just say, 1 volt to 5 volts, right? I mean, that's what we'd want in a perfect world. But the point I want to make here, again and again and again, is that the problem with Curtis's explanations is he recognizes this, but 99% of the time. But then when it comes to 32-bit float, all of a sudden he forgets all this. It's like, oh, no. We can have a signal that goes above the preamps, or the amplifier's input, source voltage, essentially. We can get that thing that goes above 5. We can save that. That stuff that clips, we can save it. And, just cannot Not. Now, he's saying, of course, oh, you just need more numbers. It theoretically sounds correct. But again, only if you forget the absolute fundamentals of how amplifiers work. Okay?
That's how much you want to amplify the signal. The audio coming out of the microphone is a fairly weak signal, and a preamplifier boosts that signal up.
It's not a fairly weak signal. It is an extremely weak and faint signal, which is completely useless.
That's what the gain does, and you get to choose how much you want to amplify that audio to sort of optimize it.
There you say yourself, the gain knob allows you to optimize the audio. So you're saying here, the gain knob optimizes your audio. And then later on, you're saying you don't need it because of 32-bit float. It's in your head, Curtis. You know it. You know the truth here. But your mind won't go there because I guess somewhere in the past you did some video about 32-bit float and you parroted these marketing claims from these manufacturers. And now that you've done that, you hold your ground. You repeated a lie, now you own the lie, and you just won't back off that lie. You will live and die with that lie. And I understand it's tough. I really do. I feel for you greatly. But you have to rip the Band-Aid off here.
Then the output of the preamplifier goes to an analog to digital converter, where it's converted into a digital stream of ones and zeros, and then recorded into a file like a WAV file. But if you set the gain too high and the audio exceeds 0 dB full scale...
You say when the audio exceeds 0 dB full scale. See, that's wrong. You're using very loose audio terminology to explain a physical mechanism, which is the preamplifier and the ADC. So from the preamplifier's point of view, you cannot exceed 0 dBFS. 0 dB is the definition for an audio engineer of the maximum voltage the amplifier will put out. Nothing ever exceeds it. What you're basically saying is like, if you're turning up your stereo, that once you get to maximum volume, that there's some audio that wants to get past it. Well, I mean, maybe there is, like in our head, like abstractly, but not physically. There's no more energy trying to get past that maximum value of any amplifier. Same thing in a car, like there's a maximum torque, right? There's a maximum everything in every physical device. So when you say, oh, the audio goes past 0 dB, stop, Curtis. It never goes past 0 dBFS full scale, mechanically, electronically, however you want to talk about it, in the physical world. And this is true for 16-bit, 24-bit, and 32-bit float. The data package has nothing to do with the voltage coming out of the preamp into the ADC. And this is another thing I think that you're confused about. The ADC never sees or experiences or has anything to do with the microphone. The microphone is an abstraction. It has nothing to do with it. All the ADC sees is the output voltage from the preamp. It doesn't know whether the preamp is being fed by a microphone, a guitar, or nothing. It doesn't know that. It does not see that. It has no knowledge, no experience. Those electrons from the microphone, they're gone. All the ADC sees or reacts, quantizes, as you said, makes into zeros and ones, is a voltage from the preamp. And I want to repeat again, why is it called a preamp? Because the voltage from a microphone is useless. It's too small. It has to be preamplified to be useful. And once it's preamplified to a level that the electronics can use it, then the electronics will amplify it for this and that. And that's another distinction we'll get to later. But I just want to stop you right there because this is wrong. There's no audio beyond 0 dBFS. It is not. Or there's no voltage, I should say. Like abstractly, sure, there's, when you're recording and somebody's talking very loud and you start clipping, abstractly, yes, there's audio in a sense that we want to capture, that we don't want to clip. But it's an abstraction in our head. And the reality in the electronic circuit is all the ADC knows is like, I'm getting a voltage from these fluctuating voltages from the preamp, and at a certain level, I get no more. That's all I know. And whether that limit, that maximum of the preamp, whether that is just below where the audio would clip or way below in this huge clipping, it doesn't know. The ADC doesn't know if it's clipped or not. The ADC doesn't know if an electron, little pressure electron, if it's part of something that's clipping or not clipping. It doesn't know. But again, I just want to keep hammering on. Nothing is above 0 dB as far as the electronic circuit is concerned. And for you to say later that in 32-bit float that you can record something above 0 dBFS, wrong. And ask any audio engineer if in 32-bit float you can record, if the ADC can record something above 0 dB in the way that all electronic and audio engineers define 0 dB to be, which is physically the maximum voltage from the preamp. End of story. If you disagree with me, write in the comments.
The audio will distort and clip and will generally sound awful. And even if you bring that audio into a digital audio workstation or any sort of audio app and reduce the levels, it's still going to sound distorted because that is essentially lossy damage, as there's no way to restore it.
True, and it's the same for 32-bit float too, which we'll get to.
Now, on the other hand, here's how a 32-bit float audio recorder works instead. Just like before, it starts with a microphone which captures sound and converts it into an analog electrical signal. That signal goes into an analog preamplifier, which is set to a gain defined, it's a fixed gain, defined by the product company that designed the recorder.
False. It has nothing to do with 32-bit float. As I explained, all preamplifiers amplify to a maximum voltage, and the gain knob is optional. It's optional in the 16-bit, 24-bit, 32-bit float, whatever. It's optional in all preamps. A preamp in a 32-bit float recorder is no different than any other preamp. And if you disagree, please put it in the comments. Instead, what the 32-bit float recording companies have done, like I said, is they're saying, okay, we're going back to the beginning. We're not going to have a gain knob. We're going to just amplify all the voltage, and then we're going to quantize it later. But to say that 32-bit float recorders are different in that they don't have a gain knob is incorrect. It's just absolutely incorrect. For instance, here's my Portacapture. This is the first device I bought to test 32-bit float. It has a gain knob. It records the 32-bit float. There are 32-bit recorders like the Zoom F3. Now this doesn't have a gain knob. It writes the 32-bit float. Now because it only uses it uses a preamp set to get the whole range, and then it works with it. So this has no gain knob. It's just one thing from the amplifier. I can't really get into the focus. This thing writes the 32-bit float, has a gain knob. So here, Curtis, here are two devices. No, it isn't 32-bit float, which decides whether you have a gain knob or not. It is not. It has nothing to do with it whatsoever.
And this is typically a really, really low gain setting, so there's plenty of room to capture much louder sounds.
By the way, you can do with any audio recorder. You don't have to touch the gain knob in the audio recorder you buy. You can leave it at the bottom or the middle or whatever. Never touch it at all. And it will work like these 32-bit float recorders with no gain knob. So again, Curtis, you don't want to use the gain knob? Don't use the gain knob, and you have that 32-bit float recorder that has no gain knob. The only difference is that when you don't set the gain knob, that, in the quantization later in your digital audio software, you're going to have to work harder to get rid of the noise because you didn't optimize the signal to get rid of it. And as for the clipping, sure, you're right. Okay, if you had the gain knob up all the way, that you'd more likely get clipping. But okay, put the gain knob all the way in the bottom on anything you buy, and you never have to worry about clipping, just like on the 32-bit float you said. That's some magical special sauce.
And in the higher quality recorders, they use a very clean preamplifier capable of capturing a lot of dynamic range.
What do you mean by clean preamplifier that captures a lot of dynamic range? What do you mean by that? Like, how much noise is there in that signal? This is what you have to prove, Curtis. Don't just like say it. Don't just like the manufacturer says, oh, we have this preamp that doesn't need a gain knob, that we get a totally clean signal. Clean, what do you mean clean? How much noise? Test it with your devices. Do what I did the other day. Take your little 32-bit fancy recorder with the clean preamp and record something very low, and then record something where you gain for it as you do professionally in the other recorder, and look at the noise. And then talk to me about what clean is.
So that even when it's at that fixed gain, the quiet sounds can still be picked up nicely without a lot of noise. Then the output of the preamplifier goes to a series of 2 or more analog digital converters. But in this case, one of the converters takes the louder or higher amplitude sound and converts that, and the other converter or converters take the lower amplitude or quieter sounds and convert those.
Can I get rantier or whinier than I already am? Yes, when you bring up the subject of multiple ADCs. An analog to digital converter is a piece of electronics with hundreds of thousands of transistors in a modern ADC. Lots of transistors. So, okay, you want to say 2 ADCs that maybe it's 100 transistors doing this work and 100,000 transistors doing this work and 100,000 maybe doing some other work, and call it 2 ADCs? Fine. Well, that's what the manufacturers are doing. Because ultimately, you only have one signal coming out of the preamp. That's all you're going to use. And the audio to digital conversion process is just, it encompasses the whole thing. Who cares whether you have 1 or 2 or how they do it? Really think that they're so stupid, like when they first came out with the first ADCs, that they were like, oh my God, like the frequencies, like, we're just going to do all the frequencies at the same time. We're not going to try and like quantize differently for different like amplitudes or frequencies. No, we're going to do everything the same way. Like the first ADCs, that's what they were done. These idiot, electronic engineers. But okay, so we had these dumb engineers creating the first ADCs in the recording devices, and now you think that there's some geniuses at sound devices or whatever, or somewhere. It's not sound devices. That's a whole. These chips actually do not come from these companies. They come from other companies, but we'll get to that later maybe. But anyway, okay, so they're saying, oh, well, we've split up our transistors and the ADC process into these 2 different things, and one's doing, and you just buy that effing crap, okay? Okay, but let's just say it's true. Let's just say that they've somehow have these 2 ADCs. One works on the low amplitudes and one works on the high amplitudes. And they sample them, and then the big little brain in the ADC says, okay, I have what you think from the low and I have what you have from the high. I'm going to merge them together into this one thing, which, by the way, you can do yourself. You can take a microphone, right, and you can put it into one jack at one gain and another jack at another gain, 2 mics, and just merge them into mono. People do this all the time. But anyway, forget that thing. Sorry for that sidetrack. So, okay, so they've merged this all. Okay, so you have this 32-bit recorder. It's the multiple ADCs. Still, the question remains, is it better than your device that doesn't say it has multiple ADCs? Now, I don't know whether it says it now or not, but whatever. Like, you pick up some other recording device and do the test. Do the test between a manufacturer doesn't claim all this multiple ADC marketing malarkey with the thing that has it. It's a test device with one and a device with multiple. Which has more noise? I am telling you, the device that has no gain knob, no gain applied, that reaches the whole thing, I don't care how many effing ADCs it goes through, it's going to have more noise. But if I'm wrong, prove that I'm wrong. If you're going to teach this to people, you're doing all these classes, teaching this to people, that these multiple ADCs are going to give them less noise, prove it. Because I think you are giving them false information. You are teaching them the wrong thing. They will not get less noise with these multiple ADCs. Now, maybe it's true that, let's just say we take a device and we put the gain knob all the way to the bottom and we record something, and then we take these 32-bit float devices with these multiple ADCs and we record something, that we would get maybe better noise in the 32-bit float recorder. But that isn't a fair comparison, because you're comparing one device not used properly with the other device used in the only way that it can. So, Curtis, you want to talk about multiple ADCs, which is complete technical nonsense. I just don't even know where to begin on it. Fine. I accept it's multiple ADCs, but prove it with the data. Prove it with some tests. I would like to see the test from you. Otherwise, you're just repeating stuff that anybody who understands anything about electronics is goddamn horse shit. Okay? An ADC takes a bunch of transistors and other components, and it quantizes the signal. Ultimately, nobody cares how you set it as 17 or 14 or frequencies or anything like that. Nobody cares. The only thing that's important is the quantization, the data that comes out of the other end. So stop it with this crap.
Then the output of the converters is combined to create a potentially wider dynamic range digital stream of ones and zeros, recorded into an audio file again, just like before, into, for example, a WAV file. But in this time, it's actually encoded in a 32-bit float format. But normally, on the high-quality 32-bit float recorders, they're using really, really clean preamplifiers, so there's not usually too much cost there.
What do you mean, not too much cost there? Again, I want to say, I have nothing against using these devices. I bought this, I think I'll keep it. But the cost to one person is different than the cost to another. Your job as an educator is to help somebody determine, is that cost worth it to you or not? And you're not doing your job here. You're basically just marketing the product, saying, hey, you know what, the cost isn't that bad, you should use it. That's what you're saying here, Curtis. I'm sorry.
Here's where the seeming magic comes in with 32-bit float audio. If the audio level that you set on your recorder actually exceeds 0 dB in that file that's recorded on the recorder, you can actually bring it into an audio app in post and reduce it, and it will be restored. It will no longer be clipped and distorted.
False, false, false. 0 dB is the definition of the maximum voltage coming out from the preamp to the analog to digital converter. Where the analog to digital converter writes the data to a fixed 24-bit or floating point 32-bit is irrelevant. There is no audio in 32-bit that crosses over the maximum voltage of the preamp into the audio to digital converter. That's not how physics works. So you have to explain to me how, if you define, and you do define earlier in your video, that 0 dB equals the maximum voltage coming out of your preamp, the maximum signal, how all of a sudden in 32-bit float, how it can cheat these physics, the physics of 0 dB being what you call the maximum voltage coming out of the preamp, that somehow the ADC can get more voltage because it's going to write this data to a different container, 32-bit float, because it's bigger, there's nothing above 0 dB. Where you're confused is that when you put the data into your audio editor, you see so much range, you can move the data above 0 dB when you're looking at it in a float way. This is a little bit more complicated. But yes, in your editor, you can move things around 0 dB, the data, but that isn't the same as actually recording it physically, of getting it. You can't record above the maximum. How many times do I have to say this? How many times do I have to scream at you to get it? How? If you define, Curtis, as 0 dB being the maximum voltage from the preamp, how does 32-bit float get that clipped voltage that would clip in 24 that gets it there where 24-bit can't get it. How does the ADC do that? How can you turn up the volume of your stereo and somehow get more volume? Like, what magic is there? How do you step on the accelerator in your car to the maximum and then somehow, let's just say because you have a longer highway, that you can go faster? Or if you had bigger speakers, somehow you can get more energy from the preamp on your stereo. You can't. What you are saying is physically impossible.
And what this relies on for this to work well is it relies on really high quality parts across that entire audio signal chain. So from the microphone to the preamplifier to the converters and to whatever that magical process is that brings the audio out of the converters and recombines it into a single audio file. If any of those in that signal chain are not high quality, the audio is going to suffer in some way.
Which applies to everything. The quality of your components is not special to 32-bit float. It's special to everything. But you're insinuating, you're implying that somehow 32-bit float has magical, better components that cheats physics and gives you audio quality better or as good as anything in an old or just any other recorder that uses, the gain knob.
I don't know for sure what Zoom is doing in here, so I don't know exactly why there's more noise in this, but my suspicion is it's the quality of the preamplifiers. They're not quite on par with things like even the Zoom F3 or the Zoom F6, or even the same manufacturer makes other recorders that are much cleaner when you boost them in post like that. So I think it's the preamplifiers.
Yes, you're probably right. It's the preamplifiers. But the big question for a person who's recording audio is not that. It's not comparing two different products from the same manufacturer or different manufacturers. It's which device will give you the audio you want. If you don't care that much about noise or coloration of your signal or whatever, then yeah, get an F3, get a Zoom, get one of these 32-bit float recorders with no gain knob, fine. But it's not about the preamps, really. It's about whether you can gain your preamps. I mean, that's part of it. There are tons of variables here. But, to say that, okay, like if 32-bit float is failing you, it's because, you don't have good quality preamps in your equipment, that's not the question. That's not the question to me. I don't care which product is better. I want to know what's better for me when I record.
So here's the kind of summary. Here's the thing you need to keep in mind. Even in a 32-bit float world, you still get what you pay for. So just because a recorder records to 32-bit float files doesn't mean you're necessarily getting a high-quality recorder that produces pristine, noise-free audio. That's not necessarily the case. So I want to also say this. On the other hand, there are plenty of people making recordings just as a hobby. They're making maybe some YouTube videos or TikTok videos or videos for other social platforms or just hobby videos for whatever it is. And these recorders may be good enough for those circumstances. So it's up to every person to make that decision. Yeah, this is good enough.
So here's my advice. And Curtis is saying he's giving advice in the 32-bit float world. What Curtis is saying is that you want to get a 32-bit float recorder, but you want to get something that's good quality in the 32-bit float world. Now, to be fair to Curtis, his video is about 32-bit float. So, okay. I mean, I'm not saying that advice is wrong. If you do want to get a 32-bit float recorder, then yes, he's right. You should compare them. But I feel if you're teaching audio recording, that it's a more important question is not whether you're going to pick the right device within 32-bit float recorders. And again, 32-bit float has nothing to do with clipping or the gain knob. But it's whether you're going to use a device without a gain knob versus a device with one. That's really the fundamental question to me. Because again, I can take my device with the gain knob, turn it down to the bottom, and I'm off to the races. And it's just like these 32-bit float devices with with no gain knob, right? So I can do that. But again, you know, if I'm just a user, I'm just afraid, or I don't want to deal with it, then yeah, you know, something like this will be good. When I don't want to deal with it, I'm just going to get this. The noise isn't going to bother me. I've made that determination because I study these things and I test them and whatever. I have a lot. But if I'm learning, if I'm new to this, then you know, I would need to know more. I would really need to understand the difference between using just one gain setting, essentially the preamps out of the box amplification of a microphone signal, versus a device where I can change the gain. That's the big question. So my advice to you is, if you're just doing YouTube videos, if you're just doing you know, you don't really care, as Curtis said, you know, for most purposes, yeah, just get one of these things. You know, they do a decent enough job. I mean, again, you could do the same thing with this, but why get all the complexity if you never want to deal with the complexity? If all you want is to plug and play, then get a thing that's made for plug and play. 100%, I agree. And are there better or worse ones in the 32-bit float world? Yeah. But honestly, I wouldn't actually compare them. I don't think the differences are big enough between different 32-bit float recorders. So the big question, so again, just get anything, whatever looks good, you know, features, whatever Curtis recommends on his channel, go get it. Like price, features, whatever, you know, go get that. But if you're not going to do that, if audio is important to you, then you must buy a recorder with a gain knob. You must get one of these and understand, play with the gain, experiment with the gain, understand how it affects the signals, how it affects the noise. You know, try out the limiter, try out the compressor, try out the noise reduction, learn all these different techniques. There are many techniques in audio recording. And so, yeah, get something where you have the most room to do stuff with these techniques should you want them. Should you want to this is basically a camera that's on auto all the time. There's no manual anything on this. It's all auto. This is basically a camera, like a camera with all these manual controls. So, you know, if you want to use the manual controls for whatever reason, then you should have one. You should get one of these. If you don't care, get one of these. If it's somebody that works with this a lot and understands this, it's no problem for me to get this. I understand the limitations because I've spent hundreds of hours, thousands of hours on devices like these. But if you haven't, so again, that's my advice to you is I think Curtis is giving you again, my advice is if you want like plug and play any 32-bit float recorder with no gain knob, again, 32-bit float has nothing to do with the gain knob, but get one of those. And if you want to get the best audio you can possibly get, and need various techniques to get it, depending on the situation and what you're recording, what mics you're using, blah, 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 get one of these. That's my advice. So, thanks for watching.